Greetings, everyone, and welcome back to the Building the New World Conference. We're in Sector 11 for our first presentation in spirituality and religion. And it's my pleasure to introduce the Reverend Audrey Kitagawa. Audrey's divine charter since 1992 is to carry Sri Ramakrishna's light to the world. In addition to that, she is the chair of the Board of Trustees of the Parliament of the World's Religions, president and founder of the International Academy for Transcultural Cooperation, and president of the Light of Awareness International Spiritual Family. Audrey is the current chair of the UN Task Force of the Parliament of the World's Religions. She is a United Nations representative for the United Religions Initiative and chair emerita of the NGO Committee on Spirituality, Values, and Global Concerns. This is a committee of the Conference of NGOs in consultative relationship with the United Nations. Audrey is the recipient of the Medal Pride of Eurasia for her outstanding contribution to the development of spiritual culture and education in Eurasia. Audrey is the recipient of the Spirit of the UN Award, which is given to outstanding individuals who have demonstrated the vision and spirit of the United Nations as expressed through the UN Charter and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And not least, Audrey represented the direction of the East in this conference's opening the direction ceremony just over a month ago on September 19th. So Audrey, welcome back to Building the New World.
Thank you so much, and hello everyone. I express my deepest appreciation to the organizers and sponsors of this initiative and for the opportunity to share about our topic for today, which is our spiritual lives in action. And while I do head an international spiritual family, as indicated by Stephen, I wanted to share today about the Parliament of the World's Religions, an interfaith organization of which I am the chair, as an expression of how our spiritual lives in action takes place every day through these important global organizations. So the Parliament has a long and rich history that helped to launch the global interfaith movement with its inaugural convening in 1893. That convening was marked by a speech given by Swami Vivekananda, and that resounding address calling for global unity had such beautiful words which he shared from a childhood hymn which goes, "As the different streams, having their sources in different paths, which men take through different tendencies, various though they appear, crooked or straight, all lead to thee." The speech that he gave is so relevant for the issues which we are faced with today, so I feel it is quite worth hearing again. And he said that the Parliament's inaugural convening was a declaration to the world of the wonderful doctrine preached in the Bhagavad Gita, or the Song of God, which says, "Whosoever comes to me through whatsoever form, I reach him. All men are struggling through paths, which in the end lead to me." Sectarianism, bigotry, and its horrible descendant fanaticism have long possessed this beautiful earth. They have filled the earth with violence, drenched it often and often with human blood, destroyed civilizations, and sent whole nations to despair. Had it not been for these horrible demons, human society would be far more advanced than it is now. But their time is come, and I fervently hope that the bell that tolled this morning in honor of this convention may be the death knell of all fanaticism, of all persecutions with a sword or with a pen, and of all uncharitable feelings between persons wending their way to the same goal. The mission of the Parliament is to cultivate harmony among the world's religious and spiritual communities and to foster their engagement with the world and its guiding institutions in order to achieve a just, peaceful, and sustainable world. How we have been known to accomplish this goal is to invite individuals and communities who are equally invested in attaining this goal to join our periodic international convenings that provide a huge platform under a unifying umbrella. Our last convening was in Toronto, 2018, where approximately 8,300 people from over 81 countries were invited to present in over 2,065 programs. It has full immersion experiential moments that provide learnings, teachings, and personal transformation to see the goodwill that is generated by the coming together of people from diverse cultures and religious communities to celebrate and honor life. The Parliament helped to launch this global interfaith movement, which is flourishing today, as more and more communities of faith engage in working together to address significant challenges that can create global transformation through coming together to make this world a better place. And at this time, I'd like to play a short video of the history of the Parliament over its 127 years that will convey the moving experiential moments for which the Parliament is so well known. So Steve, if you could be so kind as to play this video for us now.
And brothers of America, I will quote to you, brethren, a few lines from a hymn which I remember to have repeated from my earliest boyhood. As the different streams, having their sources in different places, all mingle their water in the sea, so, O Lord, the different paths which men take through different tendencies, various though they appear, crooked or straight, all lead to thee.
Today's world really need constant effort to bring closer all different religious traditions. That's, I think, and then we can make more effective role to bring compassion on this planet.
Each and every one of us makes a difference. Each one of us has a life that matters.
God is one. Humanity is one. We are one.
languages. We may come from different shades and different parts of different schools of and different walks of life, but we are one.
We recognize why we have come here in the first place, and that is to remember our connection to that divine source, that infinite wellspring from which we have all arisen and to which we will all return.
So thank you so much for showing that short video. Considering it covered about 127 years in the Parliament's history, creating that video was in and of itself a miracle. And now I'd like to share about the unique role the Parliament is playing in the evolution of interreligious harmony in our world. And it is also something that is foundational to the work of the Parliament, and we hope will also become foundational to every person's daily life. I want to start off by sharing about Dr. Hans-Peter Duhr and what he wrote in his well-known Potsdam Manifesto, that humankind is not imprisoned in its self-constructed conditions, but is a result of an animated, basically cooperative embedding that is capable of acting and transformation. For omni-connectedness, which we can also call love, and from which life springs, is fundamentally inherent in us and in everything else. This paradigm of cooperating is essential to our survival because we have to have the facility to interact, depend on, and rely upon each other in life. In short, we are in community and comprise community and are interdependent upon each other. The Parliament is moving into new frontiers of implementing this paradigm of cooperative engagement. More and more, we are joining with other interfaith organizations and communities of faith to address our challenges of climate change, the COVID crisis, and the racial, economic injustice and disparities that our current citizen movements are demonstrating. The Parliament is also stressing the importance of returning to our common morality, as expressed in its signature document, the Parliament's Global Ethic. There are 5 important directives to this global ethic, which are: 1, the commitment to a culture of nonviolence and respect for life. 2, commitment to a culture of solidarity and a just economic order. 3, commitment to a culture of tolerance and a life of truthfulness. 4, commitment to a culture of equal rights and partnership between men and women. And 5, commitment to a culture of sustainability and care for the earth. Having this common morality goes beyond any one religion, yet it is the moral and sacred ground of being that gives rise to all sacred texts, scriptures, and values that seeks to guide our conduct. It is a way of being that speaks to the development of our hearts to love, have compassion, and caring for each other. Yes, the Parliament is engaging on global issues throughout the year through its programmatic arms of its task forces. We have the women, Indigenous people, countering hate, war, and violence, justice, climate action, next gen, and the UN task forces. Soon, I hope we will have a global ethics task force. Each task force creates and promotes programs, webinars, and workshops that are of interest to the general public, as well as to the many participants of our international convenings that know that the Parliament promotes goodwill by bringing together broad constituencies that are ever seeking ways to make this world a better, more loving, and compassionate place. And we would like to have this increasing engagement with other organizations as we ourselves demonstrate this paradigm of cooperation and stress the importance of moving out of the lens of insularity to the lens of global engagement. We have issued joint calls for action on the nuclear issue and racism. We also issued a COVID-19 pandemic statement. All of these calls stress our fundamental values and a common morality to work together to address these and other global challenges. The Parliament seeks to have an active presence 365 days a year, and not just during its international convenings. However, just to give you a sample of the global issues which these convenings have addressed, they've covered the global ethics, AIDS, mitigating religiously motivated violence, access to safe water, the fate of refugees worldwide, and the elimination of external debt in developing countries, and Aboriginal reconciliations. Issues of sustainability and global climate change were explored through the lens of indigenous spiritualities. Environmental issues, the interest of spirituality expressed by youth, and the abolition of nuclear weapons have all been key areas of interest. And the prominence of faith-based organizations in the work of the UN became more focused in the creation in 2010 of the UN Interagency Task Force on Religion and Development. And I mention this because the Parliament of the World's Religion is a member of the United Nations Multi-Faith Advisory Council, which in 2018 it was created and is comprised of 40 CEOs selected by members of the UN Interagency Task Force, which came together around a commitment to uphold multilateralism and international human rights through multi-faith collaboration. So the work of the UN Multi-Faith Advisory Council is to provide advice and support to the UN Interagency Task Force on the following thematic areas: the environment, migration and displacement, gender justice, financing for development, peacemaking and security and health, including a response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The creation of the UN Multi-Faith Advisory Council recognizes the significance of religious communities and religious leaders in raising awareness wherever issues of economic injustice, extreme poverty, and inequality are the norm, and need the powerful voices of advocacy and the moral, ethical, and spiritual dimensions which religious and faith communities can provide to create societal transformation. And with the current COVID-19 pandemic that is sweeping across the globe with unprecedented impact, a global pledge for action by religious actors and faith-based organizations to address the COVID-19 pandemic in collaboration with the United Nations issued a call for solidarity, compassion, and unity. This global pledge for action sets forth several planks for action that addresses, among them, countering COVID-19 related hate speech, the prevention of incitement to violence that could lead to atrocity crimes, and a plan of action to safeguard religious sites. The work of faith-based organizations, enhanced by the creation of the United Nations Multi-Faith Advisory Council, presents an important opportunity to speak as one voice on the engagement of many religious and faith communities around the world to model the UN preamble to the UN Charter, We the Peoples. United and demonstrating cooperative engagement, religious communities and faith-based organizations can address solutions for the betterment of humanity. This is the unique work of religious communities to fully live up to and manifest the golden rule: treat others as you would like to be treated. Every day that we live presents sacred opportunities to express the deep core of who we are as spiritual beings in every thought, word, and deed. To be present in the world as a loving, kind, and compassionate person requires a lifelong commitment to turning the searchlight inward, to do the ceaseless, fearless self-examination, to see how we can change to become better persons. And the Parliament has released many wonderful, powerful, beautiful videos on important global issues. And I'll just mention a couple right here. And we released a video to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki with former President Mikhail Gorbachev of the USSR and former US Secretary of State George Shultz. 36 years after their critical summit in Iceland, at which the two great powers came close to but did not achieve the total abolition of their nuclear warheads, these two giants of history still express their commitment to the abolition of nuclear weapons. One of the other significant videos which the Parliament premiered was to commemorate the importance of preserving the rainforests in the world and the indigenous peoples who are its guardians. And this video also demonstrates the animal to human pathogenic transfers of the viruses, especially which create pandemics such as the world is experiencing now with COVID-19. These beautiful videos can be seen by going to the Parliament's website, www.parliamentofworldsreligions.org. And I really thank you for this opportunity to share about the important work of the Parliament of the World's Religions as a major global interfaith organization that helps us to see in all of the work that it is unfolding daily how we can implement our spiritual lives in practice every day. So thank you so much, everyone.
Great. Thank you so much, Audrey. You'll be back in a little bit. We're going to bring in a second speaker for this session. And it's my honor to introduce Tarunjit Singh Butalia. And let me make sure we get his introductory slide up here as I do his introduction for you. There we go. Okay. So Tarunjit Singh Butalia is a US-based interfaith activist and scholar with deep roots in East and West Punjab in South Asia, as well as in the United States. He has been a servant leader in the interfaith movement for over 2 decades. Dr. Butalia currently serves as Executive Director of Religions for Peace USA. He is also a member of the Board of Trustees of the Parliament of the World's Religions, as well as North American Interfaith Network. He's a founding trustee of the Sikh Council for Interfaith Relations and serves on the advisory committee of the Global Sikh Council. Dr. Butalia is a former advisory board member of the Journal of Interreligious Studies, and he's also served on the board of the National Religious Coalition Against Torture, as well as the World Sikh Council America region. In 2016, he was awarded the Luminosa Award for Unity by the Focalaire movement, and in 2020, he was honored by the National Council of Churches in the USA with its 2020 Gwyn Giebord Award for Excellence in Interreligious Leadership. Locally, Dr. Butalia has worked with the Interfaith Association for Central Ohio for over 20 years and is co-editor of the book, Religion in Ohio, Profiles of Faith Communities. So Tarunjit, welcome to Building the New World.
Thank you, Stephen. And good evening, friends. It is a pleasure to be with all of you, coming together to build the new world from personal to global. And Stephen, I appreciate a kind introduction. I should point out that I'm a professor of engineering at The Ohio State University. It listed me as a professor of religious studies. I wish that was the case, but yes, I'm in the College of Engineering here and a proud Buckeye. My sister, Audrey Kitagawa, who is the chair of the board of the Parliament of the World's Religions, I think talked very well and addressed the issue of your conference, which is the subtitle From Personal to Global Transformation. She talked a lot about what the Parliament is doing in its realm to promote global transformation. My remarks will be more from the personal side, so we thought that would be a good way to bridge the local to global. So let me begin first by saying that it seems that spirituality and religion were the two sides of the same coin, in essence, for every major religion when it was founded. However, over time, what has happened, in fact, it has happened for many of the world's religious traditions, that dogma and rituals seem to have stepped forward in the sense that that side of the coin that deals primarily with rituals and the outward looks and the dogma has become the more prominent side of this coin. And the one that looks at the spiritual side, the deep well that we have on the inside, has kind of faded over time. And I think this is a challenge many religious traditions face today, not just one or a few. And I occasionally talk to my students when I teach at Ohio State. And occasionally the topic does, believe me, I teach in engineering, but the topic of religion, religiosity does come up. And I do share with my students, most of whom I think are more spiritual than religious, that I believe that over time, the spirituality has been the fizz in the soda. And over time, this fizz has gone out. And as we see among young adults today in our country, and it is happening across the world now, that young adults are attracted to spirituality. And if you have religion that is not devoid of spirituality, that isn't very attractive to young adults, unlike those from my generation, in which we grew up in a religious tradition that our parents made us grow up. So I want to talk a little bit about, the role of spirituality and how spirituality compares with religion devoid of spirituality. And so I think it's important that the 10 characteristics that I have come up with, and myself and my daughter had gone out earlier today. We stood for an hour and a half for early voting here in Columbus, Ohio. I actually had a different presentation, but I thought it was important, so I made some points down. So I have actually redone my presentation while standing hour and a half in the line to do the early voting. So what I want to do is talk about characteristic number 10, which differentiates spirituality from religion devoid of spirituality. Spirituality, I believe, is based on righteousness, not on self-righteousness. That is to say that I can be right, but so can somebody else be right. However, we find that when the fizz of spirituality escapes from religion, people of faith tend to go from being righteous to self-righteous. That is to say, for me to be right, others have to be wrong. So it is really important that we make a distinction between righteousness and self-righteousness and stay on the side of righteousness, especially as religious leaders and representatives. Number 9, and I think this is something that Audrey had touched, and you heard the same word earlier from one of our religious leaders in the video, and that is the word compassion. We find too many people in the world today who claim to be religious but don't have compassion. That's what I call is religiosity without spirituality. We can't be indifferent. We have to be able to relate to the pain and suffering of the other. I remember a specific example many years ago. I was at the World Conference of Religions for Peace in Kyoto, Japan, and it was the closing ceremony. And at the closing ceremony, there was a presentation made by the chief rabbi of Israel, and he spoke so passionately. Means I have not seen anyone speak so passionately about the pain of his own religious community. However, he made a fundamental oversight. He did not even recognize the pain on the other side of the fence. Right after him came the chief Palestinian judge, who also spoke very eloquently about the pain of the Palestinian community, but similar to the rabbi who spoke, did not recognize even the pain on the other side. That, friends, is what I call as indifference. As we move towards a world that moves away from religious isolation to spiritual unity, we have to make sure that our work, our actions, what we do together is not only righteous, it also is grounded in compassion. Characteristic number 8. Sometimes we as people of faith think that all I need to care about is me and my people, the identity that I hold. And so we somehow think that I'm independent. Really, my thoughts and my actions only need to work towards my own community. But as somebody who is spiritual and religious, or only spiritual, one recognizes that our roles are interdependent. We don't have to constantly be in conflict with each other, but that our roles are interdependent. So, along with righteousness and compassion, there's a recognition that we are all interdependent. Characteristic number 7 is that we are not complete in any way in our separate compartments or the silos that we live in. If we believe in one spiritual unity, then we are only complete in the wholeness of who we are. We are not complete in the parts or the silos that each of us worship and pray in. I remember a comment made by a Paulist father, a dear friend of mine, who talked about the spiritual ultimate reality, who I as a Sikh refer to God as being the center of the spoke of a wheel, and that each of us come to the center of this wheel from different directions. His point was that as each of us come from different paths towards this center of what some of us call God, others call by other names, we also come closer to each other. And hence, along with righteousness, we must have compassion, recognize we are interdependent on each other, and we are only complete in the wholeness of all of us together. Number 6 is exclusive truths and lack thereof. Those of us who believe that my religion is the only way, and not only my religion, my narrow interpretation of my religion is the only way forward. This means I put out those within my religious tradition who disagree with my interpretation outside the realm of spirituality and the faith that I might subscribe to. And it is important as people of faith that we have a little bit of humbleness. In fact, I believe a lot of humbleness to believe that we don't have the exclusive truth, and that the infinite, as Audrey said, is the infinite. And we cannot simply bring it down to just within or box it within a certain realm. So along with being righteous, one has to be compassionate. We have to recognize we are interdependent. We are only complete in the whole, and that we do not hold exclusive truths that are exclusive to only my group or my religious community. Characteristic number 5 is, how do we define us? I firmly believe, friends, that us should define all of us. Us should not include only me and my group, or those with whom I share a faith tradition, or color of skin, or ethnic or cultural background. However, when spirituality fizzes out and escapes from religion, sometimes we think, oh, well, I really have to work on Sikh interests, from my own religious tradition. We have to make sure when we say us, it includes all. This also has to include them and theirs. So I think we need a change of language. The next characteristic 4, I think, is important. And this is something that a dear rabbi friend of mine had mentioned it to me, so I don't take credit for it. And he had said that rituals are important as long as they are not an end in itself. Let me say it again. Rituals are important as long as they are not an end in themselves. And this, friends, is important, that if I do a certain religious practice, which becomes an end in itself, then it doesn't make me a better person. On the other hand, rituals that I might do that make me more compassionate, make me more loving, make me more giving, are the ones that we should do. So in spirituality, let's remember, rituals happen both in religion and spirituality. However, religion devoid of spirituality will focus on rituals as an end in themselves, but not in spirituality. And so we've covered up till now, and I repeat those. So once as human beings, we repeat things, they sink into our brains, is we need to be righteous. We need to have compassion, recognize our interdependence, that we are complete in the whole, not only in our exclusive parts, that we do not hold exclusive truths, that us includes all, there and them are all a part of us, and that rituals are not an end in themselves, they take us to be a better place. Correction number 3 is equality of all. And this, friends, I think is important, because simply because I hold certain beliefs does not mean that my beliefs are superior than those of others who might have different beliefs. Being different doesn't mean that we are unequal. They simply are different beliefs. So we fundamentally have to be committed to the equality of all. And number 2, friends, is who do we stand up for? I believe that if one is immersed in spirituality, one will stand up for the weak and the oppressed, irrespective of who that is happening to. It will not be limited to my own religious group or my own ethnic or cultural group or the national or the religious background I come from. I will stand up for everyone. And the last characteristic, which is number 1 that I have written, is honoring the holiness. Whose holiness do we honor? Do we only honor the holiness? And this to me is the most fundamental, all are important, but I think this is the yardstick that I personally use to figure out whether I am working in spirituality or I am looking at religion devoid of spirituality for myself. And that is that do we honor the holiness of only those who belong to certain traditions or certain paths, or are we open to honoring the holiness of everyone, including those we might disagree with? So friends, the 10 characteristics, and I'll begin from 10, go down to 1, is as people of faith and spirituality, and whether we are religious or not, we have to make sure that we live out a religion in a manner that is consistent with spirituality. We have to be righteous, have compassion, recognize our interdependence, and that we are complete in the whole, not the parts, not believe in exclusive truths, use language that is inclusive of us, which includes everyone, practice rituals that are not an end in itself, commit ourselves to living in equality for all and standing up for others while we honor the holiness of everyone. Now, obviously, friends, I have a couple more minutes and I will briefly touch upon this topic as to how we can honor the holiness of everyone, especially the religious other. And I think I have 7 or 8 points that I will work through. The first one is something that Audrey had touched earlier. That is, each of the religious traditions have a golden rule, which pretty much calls each faith to do to others as you would want them to do to you. A wonderful Paulist friend of mine, the same Paulist father who gave me the example of the spokes of the wheel, also mentioned that there is a rule higher than the golden rule. It is called the platinum rule. And the platinum rule says, do to others as they would want you to do to them. I'll repeat it. Do to others as they would want you to do to them. This requires for me to know what somebody else and how to treat somebody else and how they expect to be treated and considered. I have to have a relationship then with that individual or the religious other, so I can then do to others as they would want you to do to them. Secondly, we engage in dialogue with other religious traditions, not for the sake of teaching our own faith beliefs, but the objective should be to learn from others. And for that, we need to have deep listening. That is, listening. We as human beings are programmed in such a way that we listen to ask questions. But as human beings, we now have to learn how to reduce the urge to ask questions, but listen so we can deeply understand what is being shared. Third, we never compare the best in our faith with the worst in another faith tradition. Each of the world's sacred texts have problematic verses, when which taken literally would make many of us uncomfortable with them. Fourth, when we are in dialogue as individuals, we speak from our own personal perspectives of our religious traditions and refrain from speaking on behalf of the entire religious tradition. So what I'm doing today is sharing with you as a Sikh. I am not speaking on behalf of the entire religious tradition, which would be a very heavy shoulder for me to burden. Fifth, we talk about our own religious traditions and the perspectives that we hold, but we do not infringe on the beliefs of other religious traditions. We let individuals who practice those faiths to share their own personal beliefs. And sixth, this, friends, I think is important, that each of us have what I would call faith supremacists who believe that my faith and only my faith and my narrow interpretation of my faith is the only correct or true religion. And the question we have to ask is, are we willing to get in dialogue? And this is a difficult intra-faith dialogue that each of our religious traditions have beginning to have. Once we have engaged in the skills of interfaith dialogue, we then also need to engage in intra-faith dialogue with those who believe, and believe me, this is a challenge for many of our religious traditions, not just a few. And we need to be able to work with those who believe that our faith is the best or the most supreme faith, not just for themselves, but also for others. Seventh, and I touched upon this earlier, that we stand up for everyone, not only when our own religious tradition is under stress. And I'll give an example here, and I see my time is about to be up. I only have one more point after this. I mentioned to you that I live in Columbus, Ohio. I've been here 30 years, and I live in a suburb called Dublin. And this had to be at least a dozen years ago. My son, in fact, more, because my son now is almost 14, so it's about 14 years ago. I'm sure he'll see this recording and say, Dad, you don't remember how old I am. Anyway, but at that time, my wife at that time and my other two daughters, my ex-wife was expecting our son. We were walking in the street behind my home, and suddenly we saw a pickup truck parked in the driveway that had this bumper sticker that said, Jesus loves you, Allah wants you dead. I'll say it again. Jesus loves you, Allah wants you dead. And my elder daughter said, oh, Dad, this kid goes to our school. So I have seen this pickup truck many times, at our school. So I called up the Dublin police, and they rightfully said it's a matter of free speech and this person is allowed to do so. And so I decided I was going to try to get a hold of our mayor of Dublin. And I will not share, that's not relevant here, who the mayor was at that time. So I called up the mayor's office, and after a couple of tries, I finally got hold of the mayor. So the first thing that the mayor assumes is that I'm not a US citizen. So I politely had to tell her that she should not be worried about that. Then she assumed that I was a Muslim. And I had to politely tell her that I was, I respect all religions, but I'm not a Muslim. So we got through some of the initial hurdles that we had. And then at some point, the mayor made this comment saying, you have to understand, Dr. Butalia, there is nothing we can do about it. And that was one time when I lost my temper with a politician. I said, Madam, you can tell me there is little you can do about it, but don't tell me that there is nothing you can do about it, because if the same bumper sticker said, Jesus loves you, Yahweh, which is the Jewish name of God, wants you dead. I said, my city, and you would not be sitting quietly. I said, there's a double standard that you have at play where when Islam or Muslims are being vilified, and we see that happening in our country today as we go through the election process, where the current administration has made it a point to put down Muslims and Islam as a religion. Friends, we have to stand up for each other. If I can stand up for somebody of another religious tradition, they would stand up for me. And eighth and last, friends, I believe, is that we are only as secure as the very least amongst us, that as different religious traditions, our role is not to be in conflict with each other. We are interdependent and we are more complementary to one another. Thank you, friends. I appreciate your patience. And as I said, I modified my speech completely and I hope that this personal connection that I shared with the global transformation Audrey has shared would provide a wide space within which we could engage further on this topic. And Stephen, at this time, I will turn it back over to you.
Great. Thank you, Tarunjit. And it's lovely how the Spirit moved you to make those changes and actually to rewrite perhaps the talk. So thank you so much for that, and especially sharing that last story. So my understanding now is we're going to bring Audrey back in here, and the two of you are going to have about a 20-minute conversation. And then we'll, after that, we'll move to like the general Q&A that's coming in from the social stream. So I'll just hand it off to both of you in your capable hands, and I'll see you back here in about 20 minutes. I look forward to your conversation.
Thank you so much. Well, since Tarunjit had the floor, I'd like to do follow-up question to him, especially because he made it quite personal. So Tarunjit, my question to you is, what daily spiritual practice must each Sikh undertake in your faith tradition?
Oh, wow. Wow. Okay. See, I make a distinction between spiritual practices and spiritual values that we always have to hold within ourselves. Let me first begin with the basic spiritual value that I try to hold every day. As a Sikh, we believe that God pervades the entire universe, including each one of us, that God is within each one of us. So the first thing I have to recognize every day, every moment, is that this spirit of God and love pervades everyone, every single human being. What this means is, and in our scripture, there is a verse that says, Na koi bairi nahi begana, sagal sang humko bane aaye, which translates as, no one is an enemy, none a stranger. I get along with all. Now, within that larger context, yes, there are certain spiritual practices a Sikh does every day. There are a set of prayers in the morning and a set of prayers in the evening that are done. But those, as I mentioned, are rituals that are important. Only if one is grounded in the spirituality and the one reality pervades the entire universe, including everyone. So thank you, Audrey, for asking that. And maybe if I could ask the same question of you, how do you live this out every day? What kind of spiritual practices and values do you hold dearly to your heart, sister?
Well, thank you so much, Tarunjit. In many ways, the practice and the values are expressions of each other. Mm-hmm. So for myself, I live out my spiritual life through the practice of meditation every morning and every evening, and it's very important. It's important to be able to cease the external activity and the repetitive mentations of the mind for at least a short period of time in the 24 hours of the day and come into the sacred silence. I had a wonderful spiritual mother who told me, in the silence, in the stillness is the power of God. Mm-hmm. She had this large photo of the eye of a hurricane in her living room. And she used to say, come into the center, into that stillness where God is, though all around you there may be full of activity and turbulence. So it is really the cessation of the mental processes of the continuous arising and disappearing of thoughts in microseconds, which is the appearance of form and structure in the mental realm, just as the appearance of the physical body in the physical realm. All that has form and structure must ultimately go back to dust. And so it is in the quietude, in the silence, in the stillness where God is. And she also says something very important, that no mind is God mind. And so in that, in the releasing and the cessation, the silence between the thought, that it becomes very important to be able to have your connection, that deep connection with the divine. And also having that aspect of gratitude is very, very important. You know, my mother said often in Japanese, kancha, kancha, and this means gratitude, gratitude. And there's many things that we can be grateful for this precious gift of sacred life, for the relationships that we have, whether of friends or family, the air that we breathe, the sun, the moon, the stars that shine at night, the ocean, the food, the water, every single blade of grass. And I often tell others when they share with me that they're feeling down to go out and take a walk and see the sky, especially at night, and the stars, and breathe deeply and see the vastness and seamless non-partitioned sky. And to know that we are all part of a vast universe that is just teeming with life. And finally, I mean, I have many points, but, you know, just to, so we each will have an opportunity to share our personal selves as well, is to have that generosity of spirit and the heart of giving through selfless service. And I know that you have touched upon this in your points raised, but it's really giving of love, understanding, and reaching out your hand to give support wherever it may be needed. And in Sanskrit, we have this word called seva, which means selfless service. And you're basically serving God who exists in each person and giving your very best in service to God. And in the book of Matthew, Jesus said, I was hungry and you did not feed me. I was thirsty and you gave me nothing to drink. I was in prison and you did not visit me. I was unclothed and you did not clothe me. So here is the articulation of the spiritual principle which Jesus spoke of. What you have done unto the least of you, you have done unto me. So this is the expression that we are one. Or you're speaking of the wholeness. Or as my spiritual mother said, there is only one power in the universe, no two or three powers. And that power is God, and God is love.
No, that's right. Very well put, Audrey. I am part of a Catholic-Sikh dialogue at the national level, which has been going on for almost a dozen years now. And one of our theme of the dialogue was God, our convergences and divergences. And that's exactly where we landed, that God is indeed love. Just like when our children ask us, what is love? I say, you can feel it, but you can't touch it. It's everywhere, but it is still unseen. You cannot completely describe it like love, but it pervades the entire, and that is the order on which the universe works, is on love. So thank you, sister.
Thank you. And my next question to you is Tarunjit. Can you explain to us the reason why male Sikhs wear turbans and grow beards?
Of course, sure. When the Sikh faith began with the first Sikh Guru, Guru Nanak, in 1469, most of the peasants were of the Hindu religious tradition, and some were Muslims, and the rulers at that time practiced the Muslim faith. At that time, the only people who wore a turban was not the normal peasant could not wear a turban. The turban was only worn by either royalty or the landlords. And the first Sikh Guru, because of reasons of equality, said that everyone is a landlord, everyone is a royal. So he asked Sikhs to wear a turban. So that is where the tradition, and that turban at the time was more of a rounded turban, and it was worn by men and was worn by women, both. Both Sikh men and women who are formally initiated in the faith are required not to cut hair on any part of their body. And so for men, that includes but is not limited to facial hair and a turban. In the 1930s, when the Sikh community put together a code of conduct, at that time, the turban was still kept mandatory for Sikh men, but was made optional for Sikh women. So what we find today is, I grew up in much of South Asia, in Punjab, in India, and what I found there was that since the 1930s and 40s, the tradition of Sikh women wearing a turban really is not existent anymore. But having lived here in the US for 30 years, I have come across many, many Sikh young girls. When they get independent, they want to wear a turban. I remember an example of she's very well known, her case, so I can allude to it. She came from Cincinnati, is born and brought up here in the US, came to Ohio State and came to me and said that I'm going to start wearing a turban and I'm not going to cut hair in any part of my body. And I said, why do you want to do it? You are not required to do it. It's only optional. Her response to me was that I don't feel as equal as a Sikh to men if I also don't wear a turban and keep uncut hair. And I said, what can I help you with? Her challenges were not with her friends in the dorm or on campus. Her challenge was with her parents. Her parents thought that she had become too religious, that she had gone over to the dark side. She talked about how her mom had thoughts about, oh, well, my daughter and me will go to a spa and we'll get our legs shaved together. So it was also a certain amount of sadness that he had, but at the same time, she wanted to fully reclaim what she saw as her own faith. And so that's what I find fascinating. This is a phenomenon of Sikh women, taking on wearing the turban that is primarily happening in the Western world. It is not something that is very common at all or is surging in South Asia. So the fascinating part is the way we live our faiths, how we transform and how we change happens in the context in which that we live. But thank you, Audrey, for asking that. I have, let's see, looking at the time, I think we have time for one more question. As you see that I have talked a lot about spirituality and religion and how religion over time has become devoid of spirituality. What advice would you have for religious leaders on how we can bring back spirituality into traditional religion?
Well, in many ways, Tarunjit, and I do understand the distinction that you try to make between spirituality and religiosity. But in many ways, the two are not all that separate and distinct. And I'll share with you why I feel that way. There is a recognition that spirituality addresses what relates to or affects the human spirit or the soul, as opposed to material and physical things. So it goes to the essence of what it means to be fully human. And, this does not, and which does not necessarily arise out of any traditional religion, but it goes to the essence of who we really are, who am I. So that spiritual aspect addresses that deep fundamental sense of what it is to be fully human. And religion in its traditional meaning often relates to strong religious feelings or beliefs that arise out of the context of some religious or faith tradition. However, when you drill things down to its essence, each is really talking about the nature of the human spirit, and the guidance of the person's internal conscience and moral code to live moral, ethical lives. So many religious traditions do give edicts or codes to live by. So you have the 10 commandments: thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, and so on and so forth. So it is a way of helping people to return in their practices, in their remembrance, to return to the essence of who they are as fundamentally spiritual beings, even though they may arise within the context of a particular religious tradition. Fundamentally, we arise from that sacred ground of being, where our common morality and the understanding of who am I and the basics of what it is to have this sacred gift of immortal, eternal life, for which we should be fully grateful, because without that divine spark within us, we would not have the, that essence by which the form and structure is able to move about.
Thank you, Audrey.
Well, thank you. And so, Tarunjit, at the Parliament International convenings, which I know you have attended, and your community has been so instrumental in bringing to our Parliament convenings, and thank you to all of the Sikhs around the world in allowing that to happen, because it's been such a highlight of our international convenings. And the Sikhs provide langar, the free vegetarian lunches, to conference participants. And please share with us, what is the significance of langar?
Sure. The word langar is actually a Persian word that means an anchor. Like a ship, we know when it comes to harbor, throws an anchor down. That is a literal translation of the word langar. In the Sikh community, the first founding guru, who was born in 1469, he began the tradition of langar. That was a time at which you could belong to the same religious tradition, but if you belong to a different caste, you could not sit and eat together. So the guru asked the Sikh community, when it came together, that at the end of every worship service, there has to be a community meal, not a feast, a simple community meal. It is a way of saying, everyone is equal. And that tradition has continued within the Sikh community. I would say that as Sikhs, the Sikh scripture does frown upon charity, in the sense that as Sikhs, we don't necessarily believe in charity, because charity can assume inequality. Someone is highest giving and receiving. On the other hand, langar signifies sharing. So it is about sharing fruits of honest labor with your fellow human beings. And that is the spirit in which the langar recently was held at the 2018 Parliament of the World's Religions. And the langar almost always is done by the local community. And so all the vegetarian food that was prepared was done by the local Toronto community, Sikh community, prepared at each different gurdwaras or Sikh worship places, and that was transported to the convention center. And I remember when I went to the langar, it was absolutely quiet. It was as if there was no organization. I truly felt that I was actually out. When a stream out in the Mother Nature is silent when it flows, I was like, wow. There was nobody organizing it, but everything kind of fell into place. And so it is the spirit of sharing that we have, rather than charity, through which langar is done. But thank you, Audrey, for asking that. And I think at this time, we will turn it back over to Stephen for questions that our audience would have.
Yeah, so thank you both so much for your individual presentations and for your conversation. It's really, it's inspiring. So we're going to move here into questions from the social stream. So the first one is, the major religions were founded or inspired by great spiritual masters. Do you think such an avatar will come again to planet Earth? And whoever feels led to take that one first, please dive right in.
I will be glad to begin by saying that I think they were not only founded by spiritual mastresses, but also men and women of faith. We have many religious traditions that were founded by women. And I personally believe as a Sikh that God is beyond the gender norms. God is both male and female energy, and that we do not believe our own religious tradition is the last one, that God sends its messengers at different times to different parts of the world, and that our religious tradition was one among them, and that there have been and there will be future messengers of God that will come. And I'll turn it over to Audrey for her perspectives.
Yes, I do concur with that, because I believe that God in infinite mercy provides these great souls to come and call to us back the remembrance of the essence of the divine. And so these great spiritual leaders and avatars are actually articulating through the eons the universal spiritual truths, and to ever remind us that the ultimate goal in life is to realize our eternal union with God. And so, of course, the context within which people live changes. At the time of Jesus, we didn't have, we didn't have nuclear weapons. We didn't have, all kinds of medical devices that we have now. And so, it's the relevance for the time. However, the great teachings remain uniform in some way that speaks to the universal immutable laws of love, peace, harmony, and joy. And, all of these teachings that are given to us seem to be very consistent through different traditions, as they were articulated earlier by Tarunjit, that we have to have compassion, that we have to have love, we have to care for each other, and also this whole aspect of, being able to have selfless service in your expression of devotion to the divine. So I do feel that these great souls come to remind us of these universal spiritual truths, and sometimes these immutable spiritual laws, like, the law of karma, what you sow, you reap, and so that we should be very mindful of our conduct. So the context may change because society changes. In the long march of human history, we encounter all different kinds of inventions and technologies, etc. But still, within the context of that society, the great masters and teachers do arise to help us to remember the essence of the divine.
Stephen, if I may add to that, I think it's important for us to recognize that many of the religious traditions of the East, till 50 years ago in our country, were viewed very negatively as cults. And so over time, my own religious tradition was viewed as a cult, and many others. But today it is recognized as a major world religion. And I think some of that negativity, I feel, is still there today with traditions such as pagan and Wiccan. I really feel that. And over time, I firmly believe even those that today might be categorized as a cult, I hope, and I'm hoping will be recognized as religions. Now, in my own second point, in my own religious tradition, a messenger of God is referred to as the word guru. So we as Sikhs would not use the word guru for simply any expert or a teacher as typically done. So sometimes I get an email from my students saying, you are my guru. And that opens a little bit of window for me as a person of faith to write to my students saying, I appreciate your sentiments that you are referring to me as a teacher. But in my religious tradition, in the Sikh scripture, the guru is referred to with the following kind of qualities: is a perfect being sent by God for the salvation of humankind, is in complete union with God, and is not in the cycle of birth and death. So 3 attributes primarily of the guru. And so within my own religious tradition, I strongly feel that there will be other messengers that God will send who are in fact beyond the norms of gender, recognizing that majority of the world religions have been founded by men. And so we have to be able, and I think as Audrey said, and another friend of mine who, in fact, a rabbi, she had met a Reformed rabbi who had mentioned to me that revelation only happens once. But we receive it when we are ready. And that to me is the magic. You know, our religious traditions call upon us, but it is when we clean our inner vessel, when we are ready to see, we have to cleanse ourselves to receive what can reside in each of us. That is where prayer and meditation helps us to get ready to have the Spirit come within us, reside there, and stay there. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you.
Follow up to that. You know, my spiritual mother said, you can till the soil and till the soil, which means whatever spiritual practices that you undertake, and you can try very, very hard. But in the end, it's the grace of God.
Yes.
So ultimately, you know, the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-present God knows when you are ready to receive that grace.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, thank you so much for that, both of you, for the answer to that question, your insights. The next question from our audience: nature, mysticism, and spiritual atheism are prevalent belief systems among younger generations. Based on these trends, what do you predict the future faces or the future face of spirit will look like?
You know, the future face of spirit that we can already see unfolding is this what is called this activism. And young people today seek to express their, what they commit their time, their energy, their resources to in terms of global issues that they feel are important. And of course, it becomes then an expression of their beliefs to serve and to honor the sacredness of life, whether it's through, climate action activities, whether human rights activities, but it is always pointing to the moral code within ourselves, inherent within ourselves, that really is transcendent to whatever the issue of the activism may be, but becomes the vehicle of the expression and the manifestation of that divine essence, the spiritual essence within you that speaks to this infinite love that is ever seeking outreach and expression and touching the hearts of others as a way of community and being together that really transcends any kind of term, whether it's religious, mysticism, atheism, and by whatever term you wish to identify it, we should embrace the fact that all these expressions of love in action in and of itself is the essence of the mystery of the divine that is ever moving us to seek out and do those things that speak to our inner moral code to help ourselves and all of humanity to become ever better and better in our long and sacred journey back home to God.
Thank you, Audrey. Whenever I teach a class or do a workshop for young adults, I always do a survey with them. And I find that the largest category of students, and these are college students, who they subscribe to being spiritual but not religious. That is to say that they are not as interested in the dogma of a particular religious tradition. They are more interested in a belief system that they can pick and choose certain values that work for their own personal self. So in some ways, what this means is that young adults today don't want to be told, and rightfully so, what to do and what not to do. they want to, my belief and the way I have seen is the future spirit will be, each person will have their own way or their own spiritual values that they would have. They would be grounded in, and as Audrey rightfully said, those actions and what they do will come from those values. So what our young adults are looking for are those fundamental values in which they can ground themselves. But what that home on which is going to be built is going to be a work in progress. And furthermore, our younger generations are looking at always being open to change in the sense in terms of their own beliefs that they might have. They are willing to expand them, which, like, for example, the challenge we have is that the way I live my faith is very different than the way my mom or my parents live the faith. Similarly, the way my kids live their faith is also very different. And especially in this country, we learn, as somebody who came from the East, where one of your duties as a parent is to indoctrinate, I believe, your children in your religious tradition. Here in the United States, we don't do that. We give our kids enough free space to think for themselves who they want to be and who they want to become and what values and beliefs that they want to have. And many times we find is you actually find that after you give that space to the younger generation, they in fact find in the end that these values that they are trying to live their lives by are in fact prevalent in their own religious tradition that they might have grown up in. So my sense, colleagues, is that I think this has to be more complementary, that traditional religion will continue. But for traditional religion to be more relevant to the younger generation, we have to focus, and I think Pope Francis, and I'm trying to paraphrase Pope Francis, not exactly, he said that dogma is important, but how a Catholic lives his or her life is more important. So I think in some ways, Pope Francis was also looking at emphasizing that how a person of faith lives their life. And I, for example, heard that very clearly. It was not just only for Catholics. I heard that very loud and clear. And I sense that every day, that for me to be a Sikh means that I have to be intentional, I have to be compassionate, I have to be loving, and I have to be able to see God's light in everyone, not just Sikhs or not people that are like, that God's light pervades everywhere, including our entire universe and this Mother Earth.
Yeah.
So, I also feel that a lot of it has to do with the relevance of the context in which one's life is being lived. So, for example, in my family, Buddhism and Shintoism are considered to be copacetic religions, and but the relevance of these religions as we moved away from traditional community and families, where you live in communities of, the Japanese people, they had common temple or that they went to as a way of the social medium through which they shared their sense of community. And then with the nuclear family and people moving away from these traditional communities, so too the life around the church became less and less of importance. So, what we're finding, especially in Hawaii, in these Buddhist churches, like my mother's temple, was just filled with the people in the community. But then the community moved to the suburbs, they dissipated, and now there's like 10 people attending the church. And try as they might, they cannot attract the young people, because many of the, during World War II, there was a lot of cultural assimilation that took place. So for many, speaking the Japanese language was no longer important. In fact, it was discouraged. So you had to, become very assimilated into the English language and learn, the Western ways. So when they bring in now these bishops and other religious leaders to lead the church, and they speak Japanese. The young people today don't speak Japanese, and I'm a good example of that. I mean, I know small things, little things, baby things, but can I speak Japanese? No, I can't, which is unfortunate. So I think to the extent one can retain one's language and culture and the richness of that, it's really to your benefit in this multicultural, multilingual world. But because of the historical context, of World War II, its impact on the Japanese community in Hawaii, where Pearl Harbor, they had the bombing of Pearl Harbor, all of these historical events does have a huge role to play in releasing and loosening one's ties to one's tradition. So, try as they might, they cannot find the relevance for the young people who really want to be able to express themselves and find satisfaction in what they do in this kind of activism that I had shared about earlier, than coming to listen to chanting and prayers and texts that really and done in Japanese that they find very little connection to. Now in the changing course of the community life. And so, there more and more I also hear that these traditional churches find difficulty in retaining the interest of the younger generation.
Let me ask you a quick follow-up to that, because you both referenced this dynamic of people being more spiritual than religious, and we hear this a lot. So would you say is that dynamic of feeling more spiritual than religious actually the evolution of religion?
I think in some ways, the religion now is pushing back. I think it became clear that spirituality had gotten ahead of religion in terms of younger generations. And I think in some ways, religion is now pushing back at this by bringing spirituality back into it. So I think it's that, and I think what Pope Francis said, in a way, was, to me, I saw that visibly happening. So in some ways, religions now, seeing where the trend has gone, are willing to change. So I agree with you, Stephen, that I think religion, the way it is practiced, maybe till about 50 years ago, is going to be very different than obviously the way we do it today. But looking in the future, there will be drastic changes. Religions themselves will be adapting, I believe, to bring more spirituality back, and those that don't will become irrelevant. So it really comes down to a matter of being relevant. And I'll turn it over to my sister Audrey for her thoughts.
Well, of course, it's almost like I don't want to use the word rule, but it is the measure of one's survivability, your ability to retain flexibility. That means your ability to see what is on the landscape and to be able to adapt, so that your ability to survive and constantly seek your relevance in the ever-changing external world, which Lord Buddha said is impermanent. So if the external world is ever-changing, then you have to have that facility and the agility to be able to identify what the changes are and to be able to adapt accordingly. And in the most simple fundamental self, this is how the bacteria survive, the germs survive, because no matter what man creates to throw all kinds of antibiotics, to kill these bacteria, they mutate, they grow stronger. And now we have, super germs and super bugs. And so that is their adaptability to what may be very challenging external landscape. And so too, not only for religions, institutions, but for human beings as well. Flexibility is one of the important, essential aspects of life that we must be able to have. To the extent we do not have this adaptability and the facility of flexibility, our survival, our relevance is lessened.
I remember my grandma used to tell me when I was a kid that when the wind blows, the trees that don't bend with the wind are the ones that get uprooted. Flexibility is also a fundamental law of survival that we have. But there is one thing, Stephen, I think that has happened. There's one genie or something that come out of the toothpaste that I don't think is going to go back in. And that is, I believe, in the last 20, 30 years, the influence of religious leaders has waned, even among those who would consider themselves to be religious, which I think is good that we take our religious leaders and put them up a pedestal, right? So the only place when you put the pedestal is the only way they can go is go down. They can't go any further up. So I really think the issue of religious leadership, once and from all, I think the influence that religious leaders will always be there. But I think their influence, their charismatic influence, I think is going to reduce further with time.
Yeah.
With respect to that point, I do feel that religious leaders have historically and even till today, and I do believe into the future, will continue to have huge influence. More than 84% of the world's population are adherents to some faith tradition. And we belong to communities of faith, whether it's, to the mosque, synagogue, church, or temple, whatever, we attend or don't attend. As, a practical matter, for example, UNICEF understood early on that if you want to implement on-the-ground programs such as vaccination programs, food distribution programs, that you have to engage with the religious leaders or the communities because they can facilitate the implementation of these programs by informing their congregants to participate. And to the extent you have a religious leader who has that kind of influence to withhold participation, you have some real problems with immunization success. So spiritual leaders actually have a huge responsibility to give back to their communities. And there are many who have been doing just that because religious communities are known for that whole aspect of service, of what the principles that we spoke of earlier today, and to give back to their communities and their, relief programs, disaster relief programs, everywhere in the world. It's the religious communities that are living their principles of loving one another, caring for each other, and sharing their generosity of spirit, resources, time, energy, and commitment to be positive, contributing members of the communities in which they live. And not only UNICEF and many, organizations understand that it is the influence of the religious leaders that can help facilitate the expression of the sharing and caring and giving that becomes so important to the survivability of communities of faith and people around the world. So for example, during Hurricane Katrina, who were the first responders on the ground? When people were waving flags, on rooftops, help me, come and get me. The first responders was the Salvation Army, first people there to provide hot meals and to give that modicum of relief and rescue attention and caring in the midst of tremendous chaos. So this is also the importance of communities of faith and just being human beings, is that more and more, as perhaps we may experience failed states, we have to be able to step into those shoes of responsibility to take care of each other. Because as the complexities of the issues grow, and as more and more people are being born, we have 7.5 billion people in the world. It's an unprecedented number of people that are living now on this one earth. So we are going to have to learn to help each other. And I think that, in and of itself, that becomes an expression for communities of faith, people of faith, or no faith, to be able to express the fundamental principles of loving one another, caring for each other in compassionate, kind, and giving ways.
I fully agree with what Audrey has said, that faith, religious communities, and organizations will continue to have a significant influence. But I think the influence of religious leaders, I think, is on the decline. And that is an adjustment being done by every major religious tradition, where the organization and its values and beliefs and how it acts is stepping further up than the religious leaders who provide leadership to religious organization, because young adults increasingly are not looking at religious leadership, but what these organizations actually can do when things like Hurricane Katrina happen. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, thank you. No, thank you both for your reflections on that. That's important observations and insight, and it's useful, and it helps for us to be reminded of that. We'll try to take these next couple of questions quickly because we're really at time, but I think it's important to get these in. This question is: please describe the recent development of cooperation between the major interfaith organizations, the Parliament of World Religions, Religions for Peace, and United Religions Initiative.
Let me just make a comment, then Audrey can talk very much about it. As somebody who has been involved for over 2 decades in interfaith work, I think till a couple of years ago, there had been what I would call an interfaith envy, okay? Because I work in this space, I can be critical of it, right? And what I think the landscape has changed now, that all these organized recognize that yes, we have different domains in which we work, but we have to be able to work together with each other. And I'll invite Audrey to talk about how the 3 organizations have come together and collaborate with each other rather than engage in interfaith envy, so to speak. So, Audrey, the floor is yours, my sister.
Well, I think it is that important cooperative paradigm that exists in the unseen world, and we need to manifest in the seen world. And that is to be able to work together, join hands together, and to express this cooperative paradigm and model actually this interdependence, interconnection, and the way in which we work together. Because frankly, the challenges are too huge for any one person, organization, or government institution to tackle alone. It is very important that we join hands and we work together. And through these important mobilization of these coalitions that show our ability to work together, this is how I think we can create that critical mass that becomes the tipping point for global transformation. So I'm very much in favor of and have demonstrated, I'm glad that Facebook user is actually seeing this change and this cooperative engagement between the different, big interfaith organizations, because we are actually expressing that important paradigm of coming together and working together to address global challenges.
Great. Thank you so much. So we're going to end it there because we're going to be getting on to our next presentation in less than a half hour. But before we do end, I do want to recognize and honor. Let me bring the visual up. Swami Agnavesh, who was originally scheduled to present in this sector and had made his transition before the conference started. So to the extent that either of you want to say a few words about Swami Agnavesh, please do.
I have known Swamiji for many, many years. Last I met him was in 2018 in Toronto when he was there to speak. And I have admired his tireless work. First, I think I met him was in 2003 in Geneva at a conference on action and dialogue. And he talked about how you don't have to dialogue before you act together. That when you act together, the dialogue happens in the process. And during his visit to Toronto, he was threatened by ultra-nationalists that they would not let him speak on the stage. And I had the privilege and honor of being by his side. And losing a friend, as you know, is never easy, but he lives through all of us. And that is how I remember my friend, Swamiji, as I always called him, that I would continue to live by his values. And so he lives through us. Thank you.
Yes, I'd like to, just take this time to say a very quick and loving prayer for all that he represented to many different sectors in life, and for his courage to be able to take, his own moral stance on many things, because he himself in his own right was also an activist. And so I would like to just say, in all ways, O Lord, bless him and comfort him and guide him in as you have in this and other realms. And may we always resonate from this heart-to-heart connection with all those whose lives we touch in the divine spirit of love and kindness for each other. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Audrey. Thank you, Tarunjit, for your presentation. I was just so grateful for your contribution to the conference. And for those who attended live, thank you. And we trust that those who hear the recording will be just as inspired. So thank you both so much. So with that, we're going to leave session 1, and then we get ready for session 2 coming up at 7 o'clock Eastern, and we'll see you all in just a little bit when we have Kurt Johnson and Laura George. So thank you so much, everyone. Be well for the next few moments, and we'll see you in a little bit. Thank you.